Hello, my name is Cody Margaretin, and today you will be watching a documentary that I directed for my Eagle Scout project. The film is about veterans and their personal experiences in various wars. Each story is unique and quite telling of the particular war and the period of time during which the conflict took place in. You may wonder why I chose a project about veterans. I think it's important to preserve their stories and create a learning tool that will be available to the South Brunswick School District. My grandfather, who lives with my family, served in the U.S. Navy Air Corps during World War II. He has been a good influence on my life, and I believe this is what anchored my interest in a film that honors my grandfather and all of America's veterans. I want to express my appreciation to my parents for their support. I would also like to thank all the veterans that participated in this project, for it is their story that makes this film possible. Thank you, American Legion Post 401, for sponsoring my Troop 10 and your participation in the film. Last, I would like to acknowledge my Eagle Scout mentor, Steve Kornfeld, for the moral support and guidance he provided for this project. Veterans, this film is for you. Those veterans among us, for those who died in battle, and for those who are deceased. Your love of country has made it possible for all of America to live a free life. Thank you. Abraham Lincoln once said, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion.
My name is Michael Chakowski. I joined the United States Navy in April of 1967. The Marine Corps is actually part of the Navy, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps reports to the Secretary of the Navy. The Marine Corps gets its medical component from the Navy, and I was a corpsman, so I was part of that. I was part of the medical unit.
I was in 449 Heavy Automotive Maintenance Company. It was called the HAM Company, Automotive Maintenance Company, 449 Heavy Automotive Maintenance Company. We were ordnance is our description of the department, and we were responsible for the supplies.
I've always been interested in aviation since Lindbergh flew the Atlantic in 1927. And my goal was to be a pilot, and he just forced me to go that way. I would never want to join anything else but the Air Force. I worked for the Air Force before I went in the service I was an aircraft mechanic. And I just have the highest regard for anybody who's in any of the services.
My name is Kenneth W. Strickland, and I'm a retired Sergeant Major of the United States Marine Corps. I first enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1975. The reason I went into the Marine Corps is I was looking for a challenge in my life. I was the kind of kid that when I was brought up, I had parents that were very disciplined, and I participated in a lot of sports. Football, baseball, the sports that kids grow up with, but I was looking for some kind of challenge.
Well, I joined the service when I was 20 in 1942, and well, all young guys were going into the service. Also, my father was decorated for bravery in the First World War. He was in combat in France, so that was a motivation for joining.
Actually, I went through infantry basic first, and then at the end of that basic training, there was a program that was called ASTP, where they sent people who had been in college back to college in uniform and to study something or other, usually a technical subject. And I was interested in physics, and that headed me for the Signal Corps when I got out. When I finished, when ASTP, that program was ended, and everybody that was in it was taken off to basic training.
I joined right after high school in June. In July, I had gotten an offer for a scholarship to go to Rutgers, but it was too late. I had to turn it down because I already joined the Navy. It was just a thing that I had in mind that I wanted to do, join the Navy.
13 weeks, they call it basic training. They took you in the fields, 3 o'clock up to the firing range. We took it at 3:30 in the morning, and I'm firing pretty good. And the sergeant says, "Private, where'd you learn to fire?" I says, "At 12, I had a gun on the farm already. I was shooting pheasants." He says, "You're an instructor." So it was to my advantage, you know. So I loved it. That was the thing. I liked it. A lot of kids from today, they was hollering and griping, and of course it didn't do them any good, you know, because the government told you what to do.
I did my training, well, I enlisted in the Corps of Engineers, but I got bored with being stationed in Washington and not really doing anything for the war, so I applied to my commanding officer to change. And he said the only things you can change is if you volunteer for paratroops or aerial gunnery. So I volunteered for aerial gunnery, and I trained in Tyndall Field, Florida, and then I trained as a gunner in Tyndall Field, Florida, and then trained in Marchfield, California, near Los Angeles.
Oh, I did training in quite a few places. But when I first went into the Army, I was sent to Anniston, Alabama, Fort McClellan it was called, which was an infantry training camp. And I went through basic training for 3 months, I guess. I was inducted June 1943, and by fall 43, I was sent on this ASTP program to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I spent a good 6 months there, and that was terminated, that program, and I was sent full-time to Camp Crowder in the Signal Corps, and I was there for quite a while. And then after that, I was shifted again to something else, a very special company in the Signal Corps, which was at Pine Camp, New York. And I remained there for more than a year. And that was the end of my training period. After that, I went overseas and was various places in Italy.
In the time I was in Vietnam, I was bombed, I was rocketed, I was mortared, and I had guns from one of the battleships, those shells exploding around us, and this was all friendly fire. We either happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they happened to be shooting at the wrong place at the wrong time, and we were fortunate we never lost anyone, but when that happens to you, you have a great deal of fear. In addition to that, your senses are heightened to a degree that you can actually hear or feel a mosquito landing on you, as strange as that sounds. And I'm not sure if you consider that fear or not, but let's say that I don't believe anyone had a good night's sleep in all the time that they were there.
My first assignment is I'd always wanted to be a Marine Corps drill instructor. Well, I decided that I would go to Parris Island, South Carolina, and go to school. So I went to school in Parris Island, South Carolina, and became a drill instructor. A very, very rewarding tour of duty. This is where you take a young man and you develop this man into believing that he is just the epitome of a human being, which is a United States Marine. There's nothing more rewarding than come graduation day. It's when the individual's parent, the Marine's parent, comes up to you and says, thank you for a great job you've done. We've turned this, you've turned my son into a Marine.
On my first mission, I didn't fly with my crew, I flew with another crew, and I remember we flew to Brunswick, Romania, and to bomb an aircraft plant, and I remember seeing bursts of flak, seeing the black smoke, and thinking, oh, how pretty it was. And then everybody else in the plane ducking and cringing, and every mission after that, I did the same. I ducked and cringed.
While I was on board the Kennedy during our 83-84 deployment, we did have a combat day. specifically the first time that the Kennedy launched aircraft against an opposing shore, where we launched our air wing assets very early in the morning. During that raid, we had an A-6 aircraft was shot down with Lieutenants Lang and Goodman aboard. Lieutenant Lang died during that mission. Lieutenant Goodman was a POW, prisoner of war, and was eventually returned to the United States.
We used to patrol the harbor, and you'd go by there every day, you know, to just turn around and go one to the other, and unexpectedly one day the enemy opened fire on us while we were standing in the chow line, and you know, that was another experience. And the other thing you had to worry about, there were guys, I used to sleep in the bow of the ship, and there were guys on the ship that would not sleep there because you always had mines in the water, so if you hit a mine, everybody was worried that the bow would hit the mine first, so you know, you'd be there. But it never seemed to bother me. But guys would sleep up top and on the back, you know, on the fantail of the ship, because they wouldn't sleep up forward where the mines would probably hit.
So if a Viet Cong or a let's say an enemy would have a choice of knocking someone off, who would they go for first? First person they would go for would be the lieutenant in the platoon. The next person they would go for was the radio operator, because the lieutenant, of course, is the person that controlled everything for the people in the platoon. The radio operator is how the whole communication system. And the third person would have been me, because I am the person that would have kept people alive. So as it was heard there, and I don't know what truth it was because I was never on the other end, but I heard that there was a bounty on each one of us. So if any of us was unfortunately came to our demise, that the person who did it would then get some reward.
Environments, when I was in Bosnia. I was in Bosnia and Croatia for a while, and that was a very rewarding experience. Another experience that was, should I say, that was very exciting, but also very, as far as learning, a learning experience. When we went into Croatia, we were actually the first Marines ever to go into Croatia after the Serbs had attacked Croatia and so forth. So they actually opened up their arms to us. They were so inviting. They were so wanting us to come in and to take care of them. It was really bad, and it was really terrible as far as what happened to the Croatians.
I did meet and drive General Omar Bradley into town, because at that time anyone coming in from overseas was able to get merchandise in Bermuda without having to pay the import duty or any sales tax. They just, so Omar Bradley was known as the soldiers general. Everyone, all the GIs who served in the army in Europe almost idolized Omar Bradley, because he was an infantryman himself. And the thing I remember about him, he sat in the back of the staff car and he rolled the cigarettes. He had the Bull Durham. He shake the tobacco into the little piece of paper that they had those days, and then you'd roll it up, and you'd have almost the length of a cigarette. He'd be smoking it. And then when I brought him back, it was very easy to remember him, because I had to sweep all the tobacco out of the back of the car.
Our group was the first group to land on European soil. We got there in November of '43. And since we were the first one there, we were the first ones to come home too.
Other things, you know, like which aren't really good. You would wake up some mornings and find out there was someone missing off a ship, whether it was because of somebody didn't like the individual and maybe kind of kicked them off the side, or whether they jumped off themselves. You know, I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny. Probably one of the better experiences in which, you know, everybody should do it is when you cross the equator. They go through a ritual, which you have to. They have pollywags, what they call it, in shellbacks. And what you have to, when you go across the equator, you have to be initiated. So they make up these paddles and all this stuff, and they sort of put you through. You go on your hands and knees through a line, and everybody's got a paddle that's been there, and they could give you a whack, and you would do something like they'd set up a chair, and you would sit in the chair, and a guy would make out like he was a dentist, and he'd go to pull your tooth, and he would stick a piece of raw meat in your mouth or something like that. And the other thing is that at that time, I had a little mustache, and I always had a lot of hair on my head. What they would do, with me, they'd cut half the mustache off and maybe cut a chunk of hair here and a chunk. You know, it was a fun thing. But of course, we deserved it because we threw their paddles overboard the night before. So, but you know, if you knew the guys, you could do that and get away with it. But after you went through this line, then they had a garbage chute, and you went through the garbage chute. You had to crawl through that, and at the end of the garbage chute, they had a pool set up so that after you get through the garbage chute, you could jump in the pool. But after that, then you went through. But I never got the chance to go back there myself to cross again and give it to somebody else. But that was, you know, a good thing. That was nice to do.
Vietnam itself was a frightening experience, not only for me, but for most of the people that were there. And for some of the Marines, it was a little too frightening, so some of them tried to get out of the bush and go into the rear. The bush is really the jungles, and the rear is theoretically the secured area that you weren't being shot at a daily basis. So one of the things that one could do is that there was a lot of bamboo that grew in the country, and in the middle of bamboo it's hollow, and that's how the bamboo actually brings water up through its root system. The water within the bamboo is somewhat poisonous. So if you cut the bamboo and you drank the water, theoretically you would get sick enough to be sent back to the rear, and unfortunately some of the people tried to do that. I never sent anybody back unless they were in really poor shape, so I just put them off into a corner until it went through the system, so that didn't work. Another thing that one of the guys did is there is something called an M79, which is a grenade launcher, and it's like a very small shotgun. It's only about this big, and it has a tube in it. It's about this round, and the shell's about this big. And the shell has to revolve a number of times before it actually explodes. And when it explodes, I believe, although I don't really recall, I think it's a 5-meter killing radius. So one of the guys decided that he was going to shoot himself in the foot. So he shot himself in the foot, but what happened is that the shell didn't revolve around enough to explode. What it did, it gave him a black and blue foot. So he hobbled around for a little while, and he didn't do that again.
D-Day, as you know, is June 6, 1944. I was stationed then in England, Liverpool, getting all ready to cross the Channel to help the D-Day fellows that were there. We did not land D-Day. We landed approximately 2 months after D-Day. We went across the Channel, which was very rough. We landed on LSTs, which are boats that open up and you're still in 18 foot of water. We landed in France. We were picked up by trucks and taken to Marseille. And we captured roughly, there was infantry in front of us, 60 German prisoners. They were all interviewed. Some were made cooks. They were very good cooks, by the way. Some were mechanics in a shop. Some did administrative work. I was motor sergeant in Marseille. I had 2 that worked for me. And they are, let me tell you, they are workers. They clean, they put equipment where we wanted it. But like the Geneva Convention, we had to treat the prisoners fairly, which many times our prisoners weren't treated fairly. But we fed them, we housed them, and of course they were under constant firing, you know, guards were 5, 6, 7 people were guarding them all day when they worked in the fields. We had to do it. That was part of the Geneva Conference.
In the Marine Corps, you have what's called a MUSOC. It's Marine Expeditionary Special Operations Capability. And what that is you get on a ship and you have you have an infantry battalion, you have artillery, you have everything to sustain what's called the MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit Command. So which means that you could go anywhere in the world and stay there for at least 30 days and support all your Marines with all your support. So that's what makes us different and unique than any other service, because we can be somewhere within 24 hours and we can have a whole infantry battalion with all of its support within 24 hours with a MUSOC. So that's very, very impressive. And so we did that, I did that with 2-8. With 2-8 I was a company gunny, so I was in charge of a company. And the company, when I first got there, they was nicknamed Goofy Golf. Well, because of the leadership that I've had and because of the mentors that I've had in the past, I was able to take that company along with my staff and other Marines, because you're only as good as your average Marine. Okay? Nobody makes something by themselves. You always have to have the help of your people. And because of that, we became the best in the battalion and also the best in the division.
I enjoyed Patton very much. I think, as I say, we've always had to be very much on time, and he always referred to me as son. And every time they'd call, if you do something well, almost every time that particular person would call for a driver, you'd get the same detail. So I got to drive General Patton, well, any numbers of times, or the 2 years I was there. And then eventually they had formed the tank. I believe the tank was formed out of, at least he had command up as far as Camp Meade in Maryland. And when I transferred out to out of the city of Washington, they had the Pentagon completed by that time, and we had a post, they call it the South Post of Fort Myer, Virginia, which was right opposite Arlington Cemetery. And that our staff, you could walk from our barracks over to the Pentagon back. And by that time, we were on the process of being shipped overseas. So I didn't get to see Patton very much after that.
Well, on one of our missions, we were supposed to fly to the Russian front to bomb the German soldiers. And they gave us instructions that if the target was covered by clouds and you could not see the ground, that we were not supposed to drop our bombs because we might hit the Russians. So we got to the target and it was cloud covered. We couldn't see the ground, so we couldn't drop our bombs. In that case, they gave us a first alternate target, which was also off limits. And they gave us a second alternate target, that was the same thing. So we decided to come home without dropping our bombs. However, in our group, the lead airplane, there are seven bombers in a squadron, and only the lead airplane carried a bomb sight. So our bombardier would fly in the nose turret, and when he would see the lead airplane drop the bombs, he would salvo our bombs. On this mission, he didn't do anything, so he climbed out of the nose turret and let the nose gunner go back in the turret in case of any fighter attacks. And in getting out of the turret, immediately behind the turret, there's a table where the navigator and bombardier work on, and there is a salvo switch on that table. And with his big fleece-lined clodhopper boots. Getting out of the turret, he kicked the salvo switch after I closed the bomb bay doors. And of course, it was, I forget what kind of bombs we had, but they went through the doors, knocked the doors. The doors have rollers on that ride in a channel, and the bomb weight bent the doors and pulled the rollers out of the channels, and the doors were hanging straight down, and they were lower than the wheels, so we couldn't land that way without bashing up the airplane. So fortunately the bombs went out armed, which means the arming wires stayed in the bomb shackles. This is about a 1/16 diameter brass wire, so I took 3 of those and twisted them together, and they were quite long, and bent it into a V, and then put one foot on the catwalk, and with these clodhopper boots, they were just about wide enough to take it, and the other one on a channel over here, the open bomb bay down there, and to get down into the slipstream to pull the doors up, and we finally got them up, wired shut, and when we got back to the base, we landed, and the crew chief of this airplane happened to be a very particular guy, and if you came back with a bullet hole or a flak hole in his airplane, he bawled you out. Well, the doors were wired shut, and his first action, every time you came back with his airplane, there is a door on the right side of the fuselage, forward of the bomb bay, where you open that and you pull a handle, and that opens the bomb bay door so we can get out. That's the way we went in and out of the airplanes, through the bomb bay. Well, he grabbed the handle and nothing happened because the doors were wired shut. So I had a pair of diagonal cutting pliers, and I cut the wires, and the doors fell down on the ground, and I was his enemy forever. And I used to ask him, we didn't fly the same airplane on every mission. Some crews did, but not in our outfit. We flew a different airplane every time. So when we'd fly his airplane, as with anybody else, I'd always ask him for a pair of pliers and a screwdriver and a piece of wire. It might mean the difference between coming back and going down. And he said, oh, you guys borrow their tools, you go out there and you get shot down, and we can't replace the tools. That didn't go very well with me.
Southern Europe, we flew to the one of the 3rd most heavily defended target, the Ploiești oil fields in Romania, and we flew there, our group flew there 6 times.
Lebanon, we were at Condition 3, wartime steaming, which is more sailors on watch. The officer team was usually in 5 section, so since we were not necessarily close ashore, we used to replenish, on-the-way replenishment is where you get gas and food and, say, more weaponry, arms, about every other day, because they didn't want especially the fuel supply. The Kennedy was the largest and last conventional aircraft carrier that was built. So we didn't want to, we had a certain threshold that we had to maintain for our fuel. So we used to get up, at that time I was in deck department, so we used to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning for a 2-hour man our replenishment stations to start replenishment about 4 in the morning, finish about, say, 6 in the morning, and then we'd start our work day. So somewhere in there you grabbed a couple hours sleep.
About 2 years, and then I was handpicked for assignment, which was called MSG duty, Marine Security Guard duty. Now this is when a young Marine goes to an American embassy and provides security for an American embassy in a foreign country. And you're talking about some real challenges. There's some serious challenges when you're taking a young man, or nowadays a young woman. At the time we didn't have young women, but now you do. But taking a young person and taking them over to a different country were a place where they're not used to, and they have to provide security, and they go through all different types of areas. I was in Yaoundé, Cameroon, in West Africa, and this was in the 70s. Now, about that time also, there was an uproar going on over in the African nations, and I believe it was in Libreville, Gabon. There was actually a revolution going on. So in N'Djamena, Chad was a real hot spot at that time, and we as Marines had to stay up 24 hours and take in evacuees, because evacuees were coming in from N'Djamena, Chad, and it was a very trying time.
A lot of experience was when you went from an aircraft carrier to a destroyer. Of course, you're talking on an aircraft carrier like maybe 35 to 4,000 men on that. You go to a destroyer and you probably got 300 men, and you're it's like I don't know, being on a cruise ship and then going out in a rowboat in the ocean. You know, the difference because of the size of the ship.
Was killed in 1970, which is after I had left, and we'll call him Chester. Chester was part of this was his second tour in Vietnam. He was a sergeant, and in his first tour he was in recon. Recon is where they send 1 or 2 people in the middle of nowhere. They kind of shoot you in, and you live off the land. So you have a canteen. You may have some food, but you basically have a canteen, and whatever around, you kind of figure out how to eat. And you do reconnaissance in the area, and you see where the enemy is. And then you have some plan of either walking out of the bush and then going back to civilization, or your rear at that time, or they sent a helicopter in after you, and they kind of helicoptered you out. Most people in recon did not live to get out of recon. They probably had the highest hit rate of anyone. But he survived the first time around, and when he joined the unit, it was his second tour of duty in Vietnam. Chester and I got along real well, and I was speaking to him one day, and I said to him, Chester, I could understand somebody getting here the first time, because after all, I'm here the first time. I don't understand somebody coming here the second time. What happened to make you come back specifically to Vietnam? And then he told me his story. Chester came from a place in West Virginia. I believe it was Bar Holler, but it's a very long time ago, I don't remember. But it was a little town in West Virginia. And he had gotten out of the Marine Corps after his tour of duty was up the first time, and he was back home, and he was doing whatever he did back home. And he happened to be in a bar on a Saturday night, and he was a very quiet guy. He didn't bother anybody, sat in the corner. And I guess the local bully came up to him and was picking on him, and he asked him not to pick on him. And the local bullies started picking on him again, and in about 3 minutes, Chester had him on the ground and almost killed him. One of the part of the training when you're in the Marine Corps is you learn how to kill very easily, and Chester was very good at this. And Chester then realized that he could not exist in civilian life. And so what he did, the following day, he went back, joined the Marine Corps again, and asked to go back to Vietnam. And unfortunately, somewhere in 1970, he passed away. This has to do with being conditioned and reconditioned. And I believe somewhere during the Vietnam episode, the government realized that people like Chester, who were taught how to keep themselves alive and how to defend themselves in any manner appropriate, never were taught not to do that back in civilian life. And that, if that process, that program was in place before he re-enlisted, he may not have re-enlisted, and he may not have gone back to Vietnam, and he may still be alive to a day. And that's the story of Sergeant Chester.
When we landed in France, we were treated like kings. Naturally, we were liberating France, and we were just treated like we were kings. We go any restaurants, anywhere, we got first-class service, and they were very happy. I was in France driving a tank when the war ended, and everybody just piled on that tank. They went nuts. They really appreciated the Americans. We freed them, because if we didn't, Hitler was going right on to and burn Paris down. So D-Day, we lost many people. We landed at approximately 180,000 people on D-Day. We lost quite a few. Of course, there were planning. We did do a lot of planning, but the Germans had a 262nd Infantry that we did not even know about behind the lines. So we suffered casualties, believe me, and I was sorry for all the ones we did. Many of my buddies with me didn't come.
But one thing about Patton wasn't well received by the press when they had prior to my being assigned to Washington, they were running an exhibition, or it's like a military game, and instead of having having jeeps weren't even, I don't even think, they were just being introduced at that time, but they had horse-drawn caissons pulling the gun carriages. It's what a caisson. And one of the horses in that running, as they went around the circle, one of the horses in that team fell and broke his leg, and to get him out of the way, General Patton was known to have, I didn't witness it, but he was said to have shot the horse right in front of the audience, because there was no way of curing the horse. Back in those days, a horse breaks his leg, the only thing he could do is just shoot him, because he'd only thrash himself to death, and you couldn't get near him to give him a anesthetic.
About 10 years ago, two people happened to be at a convention of Vietnam Veterans of America. Actually, it's probably about 15 years ago. And they were next to each other. And they started talking about Sergeant Chester that I discussed earlier. And one of them said, I was in Vietnam when Sergeant Chester got killed. And the other one said, I was in Vietnam when Sergeant Chester got killed. And the first person said, I was in 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And the other person said, I was in 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And the first person said, I was in Fox Company. And the other person said, I was in Fox Company. And they looked at each other, and he said, I was there at such and such time in 69, 68, 69. And he said, I was there in 68 and 69. And what happened is that they just didn't recognize each other, because time plays tricks on the body and on the mind. And from that meeting started an organization that has an annual reunion.
I actually was in the Navy recruiter's office when a Marine drill instructor or a Marine recruiter walked in, and when I saw him walk in, just by the way that he walked, I decided to follow him out the door, because I knew that's what I wanted to be. I was told that it was going to be the closest to Hades as I could ever be, as far as explaining to me what the Marine Corps was going to be like.
But I think what I would say, if I was a young man today, I'd join Tamar. Food, clothing, shelter. I come out, I got 4 years Rutgers free. So today, especially today, where things are, the technical and advances we got, computerized, everything, if I was young today, I'd jump right in.
It's made me appreciate more what we have back here in the United States. We have a great amount of wealth.
Discipline, manners they taught you, and respect, you know, that really was a big thing to me. We realized that the veterans aren't going to last forever, and there is a movement now by 2nd and 3rd generation members of the veterans
that are now taking interest in taking over for us when we're gone. Especially our group, because as a member of the 47th Wing, it was the most decorated wing in all the Air Forces. Our group flew 451 missions, which is more missions than any other group of any kind. They received more decorations for valor and so forth, injuries and what have you. And what makes me feel so proud now is that these second and third generation people, they come up to you at the reunions and they say, I want to thank you for your contribution to freedom, that we can live in freedom. And they said, we thank you for your part in it. And that makes my buttons want to pop right off of my chest.
I was there to defend this country, to keep this country free. They told us when they were teaching us in the field, basic training, kill or be killed. We had to capture the enemy so this country would be free. So we were on the lookout constantly. We were repairing trucks. We had our carbine on our backs. It was to keep this country free and to get the foe